Hello everybody, my name is Dratnos, and welcome to This Week in Mythic Plus. This week's affixes are Tyrannical, Spiteful, Quaking, and of course, Thundering. So, for those who aren't super familiar with the affixes, Spiteful, when you kill a mob, little Spiteful Shade's gonna spawn. Most mobs will spawn Spiteful Shades. Some mobs don't trigger any on-death affixes. So like little tiny mobs like the Whelps in Ruby Life Pools, for instance, if you pull those, or the Scorchlings in Ruby Life Pools, any sort of little mob, anything that didn't drop Sanguine, anything that didn't cause bolstering stacks, anything that doesn't burst will also not create a Spiteful Shade when it dies. The Spiteful Shades have quite a lot of health, but they lose a percentage of their health every second, and so they die after like 10 seconds of being left alone. But they do chase melee down, and as the keystone level starts getting anywhere above like 15-ish, they start getting awfully close to just one-shotting anybody that they successfully connect with. So you can CC them. It's usually not worth putting DPS into them because they do die. They do take so much damage from their own damage over time effect, and they have such a large health pool that you usually don't want to do that. But you do want to use effects like stuns, AoE stuns, Ring of Peace, knockbacks, any sort of effects to keep them. AoE slows. It's a great week for stuff like Frost Mages, keeping packs just in a permanent slow, and then as everything's dying, all of the Spitefuls start getting slowed as well. And it's also a great week to start using your AoE CC effects at the end of a pull rather than at the start of it, so that you can catch the last couple of mobs and also the first couple of Spiteful Shades. Because it's a Spiteful Tyrannical week rather than Spiteful Fortified, it shouldn't be too nasty on the trash. Spiteful Fortified weeks can actually be they can be pretty annoying because you're dealing with lethal mobs and then they're spawning Spitefuls. But because neither of the other affixes, or none of the other affixes really affect the trash experience too much, I think actually it's going to be a pretty good week. Spiteful, though, in particular, if you're melee DPS, you will hate this affix. It is a affix that will kill you. Quaking is so a lot of people don't actually know how Quaking fully works. Every 20 seconds, the game flips a coin. It's not a fair coin. I don't actually know what the percent chance is, but the game decides randomly every 20 seconds whether or not there will be an earthquake. If there is one, then everybody will get a little circle around them, and 2 seconds later it will explode, and anybody else in that circle is going to take 40% of their health, physical damage, so it's reduced by armor, but 40% of their health as damage, and get interrupted if they were in the middle of a cast. The interrupt will happen even if you're not stacked on anybody else, but if you spread, there's no damage going out. This one, there's a couple of boss fights that this will be pretty annoying on. In particular, the combination of affixes that you'll actually find most deadly with Quaking is actually the Thundering overlap. If you get a Quaking overlap right as you're trying to clear Thundering, that can be the most deadly time in this affix. So my advice for you this week is, if you're somebody who likes to clear Thundering at 2 seconds left, consider clearing it at 4 seconds left this week, or there are weak auras you can get that will put a Quaking timer up that will show you when Quaking can actually spawn. Because like I said, it's not like it could just happen at any time. It is on a 20 seconds. The game decides, like the game might give you Quaking. So if you can see that, oh, there's a Quake in 5 seconds, my Thunder is expiring in 5 seconds, maybe I should clear now rather than milk this for a couple more seconds of damage. So I'll put a link to this weak aura in the description below, and that can be useful for you to let you track when Quaking might be. There's also some weak auras that will like air horn you to stop casting if you are in the middle of a cast that's going to get interrupted by Quaking. That's useful if you are playing a caster as well. Okay, dungeon specifics this week. We're looking at mostly good dungeons. I mean, I suspect that if you're pushing keys, the affix that is going to be most felt this week is likely to be Tyrannical. It could be the Spiteful and the Quaking in some spots, but I think you're mostly looking at Tyrannical being the hard part of this week. So make sure you have your Lust for bosses. There are a few dungeons where you can still send Lust on trash, like Knock It Offensive, for instance. You can send a Lust on this big patrol. I really like landing on this patrol and just killing it. The massive patrol is the first thing you do. And you can still Lust there because you'll still get your Lust for Raging Tempest, right? Whereas if you Lust Granith, you might actually not have it for Raging Tempest. Some groups like to start Raging Tempest. I think you just want to start Granith side, though, so you're not flying too much backwards where you were coming from. And then, yeah, I think that's the main thing. Make sure you have Lust for Raging Tempest in this place. It's really good if you can try and group up the mobs here and not end up having a 50% health bolstered longbow at the end of these pulls. But if you do... Oh, wait, it's not bolstering, sorry. That was last week. This week is Spiteful Quaking, so yeah, all good. No more of that horrible bolstering the Lance Masters and bolstering the longbows. You will have to deal with Spiteful, but actually the Spiteful in this area, it's kind of nice. It's a pretty wide open area, so usually you're not going to get hunted down too badly by any Spiteful shades. Azure Vault, there are a couple of tight corridors in which you are going to have some trouble with Spiteful if you're not careful, so do watch out for that in this dungeon, like in here, you know, especially if you're in here and you're trying to like not pull these whelps. You have a pretty narrow space, so that's where you really want to make sure that you have effects that will stop the Spitefuls from killing people instead of forcing people to run really far and then potentially pull stuff that you're not ready for yet. Quaking is also nasty in these narrower areas of the dungeon, so yeah, consider trying to pull back into more open areas whenever you're in a dungeon that does have narrow confines. Algathar Academy, the Lashers aren't going to trigger Spiteful, so you don't have to worry about that out of this area. And yeah, just make sure you have Lust for bosses. Overgrown Ancient's a good Lust. Actually, Kroth is a really nasty boss as you start pushing high keys as well. That's going to be one where you'll end up having a lot of difficulty, so might be one worth lusting as well. Maybe doing some extra pulls until it's ready, and then getting back there and killing off Kroth with your Lust. Halls of Valor, they nerfed this dungeon a lot since last Tyrannical week. The bosses now, most of them have like 10 or 15% health less than they did last Tyrannical week, so it's still a tight timer, but it's a lot less tight than it was 2 weeks ago last Tyrannical week. The bosses still last a long time, but less of a long time, so a little bit more of a reasonable dungeon. Spiteful is pretty annoying as especially if you're doing one of these routes like I usually do, where you're trying to not pull this patrol. It can be really annoying. You're operating in a pretty small space in this area, so honestly, if you're at a key level where it's not too low that this is super inefficient, you just pull this patrol as one of the first things you do and just take it out of contention so you don't have to deal with it as you're doing the rest of this trash. The problem with that in Halls of Valor is because the timer is so tight, you kind of can't afford to be doing inefficient pulls like that if the key level is at all high, but if you can afford to do that, then you should. It'll make your life easier. Court of Stars, always a pretty nice dungeon to roll into. None of the bosses are too bad. Honestly, the hardest boss, I think, is Talixe on Tyrannical. I think that post-nerf, Melandris isn't too bad, and Gerdo's not too bad either, so I would save Lust and make sure that you have it for Talixe. You can use it kind of anywhere in the first 7 minutes or so of the dungeon, and then send it on Talixe when you get to her, and I think that's the best way to Lust this dungeon, but yeah, I recommend this getting down here to the docks as one of the first things you do, skipping past this stuff early and doing the docks. The docks gives you a lot of count, which means you're not going to have to like hunt for bad count later. You can instead do like these pulls and then just grab an extra pack later. But yeah, I like going down to the docks. The docks really aren't too bad. There's a lot of frontals, but there's really only one caster, which is this Duskwatch Arcanist. So you just CC this sentry or pull it in and kill it first. And then kick the Arcanist on Nightfall Orb and Seal Magic, and make sure your tank doesn't get hit by one of the 6 frontals, and bang, easy pull. Shadowing Burial Grounds, free dungeon in terms of trash. Bosses are not free in this dungeon, but they're kind of close. First boss is going to do a lot of damage to you, your group, and your tank. If you can beat that boss, I think you can beat the rest of the dungeon, though. I think that's the hardest boss in here, so make sure you have Lust for it, and then, yeah, bang. Temple of Jade Serpent, bosses and trash. Trash is actually pretty nasty in here. So the Little Shaw friends, the Lesser Shaw, and the ones spawned by the Shambling Infestors, those do not trigger Spiteful, but these packs are still really nasty. Even on Tyrannical, your tank is going to be under a lot of threat from mechanics like Dark Claw and Haunting Gaze. These things just do a huge amount of magic damage to your tank, so unless your tank is like a DK that has a pretty easy time living that sort of incoming damage, then this is the trash is actually still really something you want to look out for. Lusting in this dungeon on Tyrannical, you can lust this first trash pull or the first boss, and then you can lust again off cooldown somewhere in the library area, and then you can lust either Liu Flameheart or Shaw of Doubt. If you're lusting Liu, I would recommend saving it for 70%, as that's when this boss enters the Jade Serpent stance or whatever and gets really scary. for your tank and for your DPS as well with the way that the Jade Serpent kick works. So yeah, I would recommend doing that. Even if you're not lusting Liu, use your cooldowns at 70% and just try and push from 70 to 30 as quickly as possible, because that is the part of the fight where you're in huge danger. Phase 1 and Phase 3 of this fight are very easy, but Phase 2 is very deadly. And then yeah, this last trash back is still extremely nasty even on Tyran. So do not be afraid to blow all your cooldowns on it as well. You'll get them at some point during Shoved Out, and that is fine. Okay, that's a quick look at the dungeons and the affixes this week. Hope you have some success in your keystones, and thanks for watching. See you in the next one. Bye.